Hey y'all, Janice on the mic. It's been a little while. I wanted to say something really quickly. I had a really interesting discussion last night with someone, and I wanted to share this discussion with my YouTube fam. Um, so at the time of this recording, America and particularly Black Americans are still reeling from what we saw happening a few days ago to George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I was reflecting on my time in Minnesota. For those of you watching who may not know, I actually lived in Minnesota growing up. And I lived in a place called St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is an hour or so outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I on my Instagram, if you all follow me on my Instagram, I'll leave a link below, but if not, you should definitely start following me. And so on my stories, I posted about my experiences with racism. And I've lived in, as y'all may or may not know, I've lived in the deep South. I've lived on the East Coast, and I have lived in the Midwest. So I lived in Minnesota prior to moving to, so I lived in New York, and prior to moving to New York, I lived in rural Louisiana. So I was in the deep South. And in my experiences, I have never experienced racism the way I experienced racism in the Midwest. Yes, racism exists everywhere, as we saw this week also with Amy Cooper and her calling the cops on a innocent Black man who asked her to put her dog on a leash. So yes, we understand that racism happens everywhere. But what's interesting about the Midwest is that when I was there, which was in 2000, a lot of the people that I was interacting with did not have experiences with Black people. They'd never really interacted with Black people. They'd never really seen Black people, versus in the South, where Black people are on one side of the town and the white people are on the other, and everybody kind of stays to themselves. So I think what's interesting about the Midwest is that the racism there is more insidious, in that many of the people that you go to school with, that you are friends with, that you interact with, are the kind liberals that smile in your face and think that they're not racist. But in actuality, oftentimes these are the same people that uphold systems of privilege and supremacy. And last night when I was having a discussion with someone, we got into a really interesting discussion because I brought this up and I explained that we really all have to, every single person who has grown up in the United States has been indoctrinated into a system that upholds systems of white supremacy. So it's important that each person, no matter what race you identify with, we take an honest look at ourselves and the ways in our lives that we uphold systems of supremacy. As a Black woman, there are probably ways that I have upheld systems of white supremacy and privilege. I have privileges that I recognize. But I think that what is really problematic when we are talking about how to move towards equity, racial equity, social justice, is that this idea that you are one of the good ones. And Robin DiAngelo talked about this in her book, White Fragility. And she discussed how you have to really watch out for those who think that because they have a Black friend, because they have a Black child, because they have somebody in their life that is Black, a coworker or what have you, that they are not racist and do not uphold systems of supremacy. I think that these types of people are the worst, because just in my research, and I think I have a little bit of a background in psychology, I think the types of people that are most problematic and most insidious are not necessarily those who make it known that they're racist, but those who think that they are not, because no change is going to happen if you do not think you have anything to change, if you do not recognize your privileges and your blind spots. And this is so, so critical to understand. So in this discussion that we were having, it reminded me of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter that he wrote, and I wanted to share a little bit of that with y'all. So in Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, he said something that I thought illuminates this idea that I'm talking about. So he said, first, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been, gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding, and I want y'all to listen to this because I think this is the most important part. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Let me run that back. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I think that was really important, and I think that Dr. Martin Luther King recognized this idea of what I'm saying. I would rather know that my enemy has a knife to my face than feel like you're my friend when you're really my enemy with a knife behind your back. And I think that when we're having discussions about dismantling systems of oppression, how do we deconstruct systems of oppression? It's so important that each person in the United States, because this is where I live and this is the context I'm speaking about, it's so important that each of us look within ourselves and recognize that even if our intentions are good, it does not absolve us from being racist. And, I think that you can still be a person of color and have views that are anti-Black. You can still be a person of color and uphold systems of supremacy. And I'm sorry, y'all. I see my nose is sweating a little bit. I'm getting hot and heated. So I think that it's really important to understand when we have this discussion, the first part of change is recognition. You must recognize that there is some sort of problem that exists in order for change to actually take place. If you feel like you are not racist and that you're one of the good ones, then you're not going to make any efforts to recognize your privilege. You're not going to make any efforts to change. And it's these types of people that we really, really have to focus on and target. So in the discussion that I was having with this person said he thinks that is he thought that this mindset is problematic. And he said, I think you should focus on the enemy that you know, rather than focusing on the enemy that you don't know or you don't fully understand. And I disagree. I think that the enemy that we know how to deal with the enemy that we know. I personally think that it's important to not only focus on the enemy that we know, but also on these individuals that Dr. Martin Luther King was referring to, and the moderates who think that they are do-gooders, who think that they are not racist. And one thing that I want to leave you with, and I would love to hear what y'all's thoughts are, whether you agree with me or whether you agree with this person I was having this conversation with, but one thing that I found really interesting is that in these cases where when we're talking specifically in the context of white and black people, and in recent years when we've seen situations where there is a black person that was wrongly or innocently killed or shot by a white person, whether that's an officer or whatever, I think that the first line of defense is in saying, I cannot be racist because I have a black XYZ. We saw it with George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. I saw that part of the narrative was that George Zimmerman could not be racist because I think he is half Hispanic. So he identifies, and I'm not sure how accurate this actually is, but he identifies as a person of color, so he cannot be racist. In this situation with Amy Cooper that we saw where this white woman in New York City asked or a black man in New York City asked a white woman in Central Park to put a leash on her dog. I saw an article a few days ago that said Amy Cooper was actually a liberal. So I think that this just highlights this particular issue. But people were saying she cannot be racist because she's liberal. She's spent money donating to campaigns of Obama and this person and that person. And I think that if we are trying to deconstruct systems of oppression, we need to get rid of this mindset that a person cannot be racist because they identify as a minority group. A person cannot be racist because they voted for Obama and they would have voted for Obama for a third term. I think that adopting the mindset that those types of people cannot also simultaneously, while voting for Obama, uphold systems of supremacy is problematic and will not lead to any changes. So those are my thoughts. I would love to hear what y'all's opinions and what you think. I just felt like it was really necessary to make this video. I have a lot more thoughts, but I share more of my thoughts on Instagram. If y'all are on Instagram, I recommend you connect with me on there and just leave your thoughts below, and I will see y'all in the next video.